it's really easy to fish software engineers because they're so used to seeing so many emails coming from GitHub and GitLab saying, hey, this person's changed his code, you need to look at this PR, doing some code review. They're used to seeing a lot of this that's targeted, over 50% success rate in some cases.
Hey everyone, Yaniv Hoffman here, back with another video, and today I'm super excited because I have a special guest which is a true veteran in the cybersecurity battlefield with many years of experience hunting down vulnerabilities and helping organizations stay one step ahead of the bad guys. And you know what? Let him speak about himself and introduce himself much better than me. Welcome, Paul McCarty.
Thank you, Yaniv. Thank you for the kind words, mate. I'm really excited to be here, mate.
Me too. So, Paul, I'm very excited to have you today. You know, I reached out, I saw your publications in LinkedIn about application security and vulnerabilities. And I said, you know what, this can be very cool in this show. Later, we understood we have common friends like Thomas Rocha that was here only in the last week video. So I'm very, very excited about today's video. And with that said, you know what, Paul, maybe you can introduce yourself much better than me to give some of the viewers some background of where are you coming from, what's your expertise, and what we are going to speak about today.
Thanks, Yaniv. My name is Paul McCarty. I am originally the founder of SecureStack, which was an ASPM product built here in sunny Queensland, Australia. But more recently, I've been building training and what I call a DevSecOps consultancy, which is source code red. I've been in the industry for a very long time, 32 years since I got my first job as a Unix admin. And I have been very lucky to be at the intersection between kind of operations, infrastructure, security, and development teams for more than 25 years. So a special skill set indeed.
Yeah, and I'm very excited. You know, a majority of the viewers here are either red team or blue team, and today we'll speak a lot about on the offensive side. So red teaming and supply chain, right? One of the most trendiest and maybe most concerning threats now out there, where victims can be penetrated through their APIs or through their partners.
I mean, you know, bad guys have realized that, you know, software supply chain attacks or application supply chain attacks, you know, amplify their distribution. If they get something into an API or an open source project or something else, they only have to do that once, but then the supply chain attack itself amplifies that threat vector. So bad guys have cottoned on to that, and unfortunately they are full steam ahead. The number of attacks has grown pretty dramatically.
So Paul, let's jump into it. And I know you have a lot of experience. I want you to share it with the viewers so they understand. You work with NASA, you work with Boeing, in the US Army. You are, as you said, 32 years. You don't have that of white hair, although you complained. I think I have more than you, but definitely you are a very experienced you know, person.
This might not be the original color, Yaniv. Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, I spend a lot of my time nowadays working on open source projects. I'm very lucky right now. I'm spending my time doing vulnerability research and doing some red teaming stuff, and I love working on open source projects. So I'm probably most famous for the DevSecOps Playbook, which was basically a step-by-step guide to help organizations build a DevSecOps program. It's a journey. It's not a Boolean. Yesterday you don't have it, and today you've got it. It's a journey, and that's what the DevSecOps Playbook is about. And I love how popular that's become because, you know, somebody came up to me when I was in DEF CON before I got sick with COVID, which sucked. But anyhow, it came up to me at B-Sides and said, hey, I really love that thing. We use it and we forked it. And it was such an amazing feeling to know that, you know, people out there are using it. But I've also been working lately on helping organizations visualize software supply chain components. So I built a project in GitHub that helps them do exactly that, helps them kind of understand what is in their many software supply chains or application supply chains, as I like to call them. I have another project, the TVPO project, that helps them actually threat model and identify risk across that software supply chain.
Ah, nice. So one, the DevSecOps book, we will publish the link in the description. We are showing it now on the screen, guys. So please check it out. It's an amazing piece. If you want to go in that path. It's very interesting, and I recommend it for everyone. And with that said, let's start.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time working on other people's open source projects too as well. MVSP, which is a great project run by Salesforce and Google and some others. The Cyclone DX project, and Oscar, pbom.dev, which has always got a strong place in my heart. I've written a lot of project discovery nuclei templates as well for doing kind of recon and vulnerability analysis. I've worked with Size's SBOM projects, and we've also written a GitHub actions static analysis. So that's one thing that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But unfortunately, bad guys are now actually creating malicious GitHub actions in GitHub apps, and we wanted to create a tool that allowed people to actually find those things. So that's what GAST is, which I came up with that cool name. But some of the key takeaways that I want people to take away from this is that threat actors have unfortunately created software supply chain cyber weapons. Now, that's not just hyperbole. I call them cyber weapons because it's no longer just a singular like malicious file that if you install it, it infects your machine. These attacks, XZ, which you talked about at length with Thomas, is a great example of that. And I am seeing a lot more of this. These weapons are unfortunately very persistent and they're very modular. So if one part of them is identified or taken down, the bad guys can quickly, build another piece. And they're actually using GitOps, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So the bad guys are actually acting like, highly iterative software development teams. And they're coming after our intellectual property, our data, our APIs. And so that's what the bad guys are targeting.
Finally, a few times, sorry to interrupt you. I'm asking when I speak in public or I'm speaking with the organization, I ask them where do they think they can find cyber weapons, and mostly say in the dark web. And actually, it's not true anymore. I think GitHub became maybe the largest platform or depository of that, so everyone can reach it today, and that's part of why
totally agree.
Increase incline in attacks, right?
100%. And I think if it's not GitHub, it's NPM. I think those are 1 and 2. Those are vying for 1 and 2. And guess what? They're both owned by Microsoft, right? The world's largest, most capitalized company. Both of these attack vectors, these huge attack vectors are, you're exactly right. And most organizations, to that point, don't have visibility into this space. They don't have subject matter experts in their teams. They don't even have service providers and partners that can provide this kind of stuff.
Right.
So ultimately, they're kind of working in the dark. And that's what I'm trying to address with some of the things I'm doing. Maybe it's a good idea to kind of figure out who it is that, we're actually coming up against. And I think most people would not be surprised that China, is a big adversary in the software supply chain threat space. They have a very sophisticated understanding of how software is made, and we saw that with XZ. As Thomas talked about, the deployment of that malware was just really, really nuanced and I mean scarily hard for somebody like me to pick apart. The one thing about the Chinese I will say though is their OPSEC is not necessarily the best in town. I would say that the Russians and some of the other threat actors, nation state actors, their OPSEC is traditionally better. And that's just because that's how the Chinese state actors are operating. They're okay with being found out, right? And you can see that in their kind of software supply chain artifacts they're creating, their users, which I code puppets. But anyhow, North Korea is they have evolved super quickly, very fast. Just in the last year, they've gone from being like a zero to being like boom. Fortunately for us, they tend to concentrate on crypto, which the other nation states are not necessarily doing. I mean, Russia's doing it to some extent, but they need to feed their system, right? And so they need to generate, revenue. So they really focus on crypto, but they've gotten really, really good at it. Russia plays a multifaceted game. They're very sophisticated, but they focus more on disruption and kind of different style attack than the Chinese do. And there's some other notable mentions. I don't think any of us are surprised about these: Iran, Turkey, Brazil. Right. This is a global problem, right? Most recently, we saw Americans being kind of charged as part of some recent attacks, right? So this is a global issue. We shouldn't think about this as just a nation state, but I wanted to call it out because when I do find evidence of attacks being built by these nation state actors, they tend to be very good. And that should be scary to all of us. But, I think it's important for us to, Yaniv, to understand why there's like this increase, this really dramatic increase in software supply chain attacks. And I think it's just, frankly, you can boil it down to the fact that the attack surface has grown dramatically, right, with cloud apps, and we'll talk about this in a second, but also the visibility and people's understanding and observability of what they're building. They just don't have it. So, we're building with new languages like JavaScript. Where does JavaScript run? It runs mostly in a browser. So that means the attack surface is no longer the data center. It's your user's browser, right? And you won't even see evidence of this in your WAF logs or your stuff that you're sending to your SIEM, because the attack is going, whether it's cross-site scripting or whatever it is going from the user's browser directly to the bad guys. These applications are using new infrastructure, things like Kubernetes and serverless and Lambda and API gateway and whatnot. These different things add, features and add speed, but we don't necessarily understand how they kind of hang together correctly, right? We see that with a lot of AWS serverless applications. It creates its own set of challenges. And finally, people are building the cloud. And they're not just deploying in the cloud, they're pulling in cloud components as part of the core application, their identity provider, the different components like the API gateway. They're not building the API themselves, they're using AWS's or Azure's. So I think the point here is to help people understand why the software supply chain is, why the attacks have increased so dramatically. It's because the applications we're building are just a lot bigger, more complex, and we don't have the visibility. We don't have the eyes on it like we should necessarily. So that's a big problem. This one, basically the idea here is that just the attacks have increased, by over 700% year on year since 2020. Developers, unfortunately, when surveyed, will admit to deploying code with vulnerabilities or using insecure baselines because they're under pressure to deliver something by the end of the sprint, right? And that's the problem we have. They're incentivized to deliver as quickly as possible, not necessarily do it as securely as possible. And my favorite stat of them all is the fact that 96% of cloud data breaches are self-inflicted. In other words, Iran, China, North Korea, they don't have to send their A team. They can send their hungover D team, Yaniv, because we're doing it to ourselves. This is a foot gun, right? So we don't really understand what we're building, and we're doing it fast. And so these misconfigurations are really on us, not on the cloud provider. And the bad guys just have to show up and take advantage of it. So how am I kind of getting all this information? I do that by building detections and automation that are in all these places. The software supply chain is broad. I want to get visibility across all of it. I started with NPM and GitHub, and now I've moved out to other areas. But, right now, this is not a product to sell right now. This is just about me gaining data and being able to see the bad guys in real time. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But the idea here is to kind of get an early warning system for software supply chain attacks like we have for tsunamis, right, in the Pacific Ocean, these sensors out in the middle of the ocean. I want that same thing for these software supply chain. I want to see these things when they're being created, in all these different places before it's actually a proper attack. So unfortunately, software supply chain attacks have evolved dramatically. If we take a look at what was the attack surface in 2022, it really came down to dependency confusion, which had just been, identified in 2021 with Alex's famous white paper. 2022 really kind of brought dependency confusion as an attack vector to the real world, right? We actually started seeing it at scale, but it was simple. It was basically just a malicious npm package or a malicious PyPy package. You installed it, crypto mining or reverse shell or whatever the payload was. It was really simplistic. Typo squatting. This is where you actually, and typo squatting, works in different places, but the idea is that you create a name that looks like something, instead of being Docker, it's Docker without an E or whatever it is, right? But typo squatting works in multiple places. Like in GitHub, for example, you've got the organization name or the username, and you've got the package. So, typo squatting can happen in either one of those.
Right.
But then the bad guys were just using tools like Git leaks and Trufflehawk to just scan open source packages looking for credentials, and they were crushing it. 2022 saw the rise of AWS and GitHub and other attacks just by stealing these tokens, these personal access tokens, and the other things that were sitting in .env files and .npm-rsc files and stuff like that. So then 2023, that was the year where malicious GitHub apps and Jira apps, Atlassian kind of apps came about. Bad guys realized, hey, if you create a GitHub app, the good guys, they don't see the source code, right? So it's just kind of hidden from them. So basically the idea was they tricked developers into installing something the developers thought would be good for the organization, but then in the background, it was actually malicious. And unfortunately, at the time, GitHub didn't do a great job of like defining the access that those applications needed very well. And so people were just click, yes, 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 yes. Then the attack is live and it's very persistent. SSO and OAuth attacks, we saw a lot of that across GitHub, GitLab, AWS, all kinds of different places. Microsoft, I don't know if you remember, Yaniv, the Microsoft attack where people were building Azure apps that then gave you access to other Azure apps.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy. Bad guys started going after project maintainers, right? Like, unfortunately, old mate from XZ, Lassie Collins, singular maintainer of a hugely popular package. Bad guys were like, this is our perfect target, and they went after him in a very nuanced way. And finally, Docker Hub. 2023 was when Docker Hub just went from being kind of innocuous to being downright malicious. I hate to say it. Like, it's, I watch many of the new packages going to Docker Hub, and there's a lot of malicious activity in Docker Hub. And building a Docker container, it's like an operating system and code and everything rolled up into one. So it's really hard for people to kind of, even though there's Trivia and other great tools there that can help people, there's not a lot of visibility. And unfortunately, every CI/CD pipeline, and every ECS, project runs on containers, right? So it's a great place to deploy, malicious containers, right?
And it's
So
very
far, so
hard
good.
to detect it. Yeah, very hard to detect it. It's a microservice at the end of the day.
100%. And bad guys have gotten smart where it's like, again, like I said, with NPM and PyPy, where it used to be just like a singular thing and it just did its thing. Now the containers, these malicious containers will kind of sense where they're running and be, oh, I'm running in a CI/CD pipeline. Let me look for these things, right?
Yeah.
It's got gnarly. Well, that brings us to 2024, Yaniv, and it's a whole new world out there, right? Like in a bad way, not in a good way. Malicious CDNs. We saw that with Polyfill. I'm also seeing that with older repositories like Unpackage. The maintainer hasn't maintained Unpackage for over 5 years, and yet it's one of the most popular JavaScript CDNs out there, delivering JavaScript every day to all kinds of websites, fake JS deliver websites, and just all these like fake ones. And when you look at it, CDNs, the names are always complicated, so people just looks good, right?
Yeah.
GitHub personas, all these fake personas. The Tan persona is the most famous of them from XZ. And as Thomas mentioned when he was talking to you, those other personalities that were behind pushing to as well, these other fake personas. I call these, Yaniv, code puppets, and we'll talk about that in a second here. These fake sock puppets, for developer accounts, I call these code puppets.
Yeah.
But the cloud platforms, bad guys, unfortunately, have identified the API gateway and Lambda. Those are great places for them to hide stuff and to pull in components. So sometimes they use legitimate actual projects that people have built that have a vulnerability. They can then leverage that for like proxying or whatever the case may be. But sometimes they just build their own and they deploy them in new platforms like app.io and fly.io and all these new kind of cloud deployment platforms.
It's a it's a double-edged sword, the open source. It can use for good, of course, it can use for bad, and it's very hard to control and to really identify or to have the predictive intelligence to prevent it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some of the platforms are letting us down. And I want to talk about that too as well. I do a lot of research in GitHub and GitLab and some of the other platforms, and the reality is the scope of the attacks has kind of overwhelmed them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the core kind of security people have left some of those platforms.
Yeah.
notably NPM and GitHub. And so it's gotten worse just because they don't have the people there that they used to. But yeah, the last thing about 2024 that I'm noticing is just the level of automation from the bad guys is crazy. I was researching a vulnerability that this is a North Korean crypto mining framework. They basically took somebody else's crypto mining framework and just adapted it. And so it was crazy to watch this evolution of something that was out there built by, some teenage kids. And then all of a sudden they got a hold of it and just went, the maturity and the complexity of it just got, and I was like, whoa. So yeah, unfortunately the bad guys have learned that automation is the way to get it done as quickly as possible and to build scale. And that's not good for you, mate. And that's not good for me or anybody else. One of my favorite attacks is the GitLoker attack. And this was one that basically it was ransomware for GitHub. So basically the way it worked was that it targeted Brazilian software engineers that wanted to get a job with GitHub and basically sent them an email. I think I've got a slide here. Yeah, I sent them this email, say, hey, install this GitHub app. It's from GitHub, install this app. You want to have a job with us, you got to install this app. So you install this app. And then basically what it did is it went into all the repos, compressed them, ransomware them, then deleted everything, and then went into every organization. So if they were using their own personal account for actual business, all those organizations were ransomware as well. It was a very, very destructive attack. And it was, it had a legitimate looking GitHub app and distribution through the marketplace, unfortunately.
My expertise is DDoS, application security, etc. And I do see the change in the mind of the attackers. They are trying more and more to use their malware or attacks to look like, of course, legitimate requests or the legitimate business logic. That's how they can camouflage or hide their malicious intents into it and bypass the traditional defense system today. So I'm really connected to relate to what you say.
It's so bad because both GitLab, Gitea, and GitHub all have their own custom CDNs, right?
Right.
And so earlier this year, and this feature has been around for years, but earlier this year, bad guys realized they could go to a legitimate Microsoft repo in GitHub, go to an issue, they upload their malicious crypto miner or whatever it is, right? Store it, cancel the issue. So now it's stored. As soon as they put it in the issue, it's uploaded to the CDN. It's served out as something that says Microsoft is legitimate Microsoft, but it's actually malware.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful attack, leveraging, a total like a file upload feature to CDN that gets used millions of times a day. So guess what? It hasn't been fixed because there is no fix.
Yeah.
And bad guys can hide that malicious content there and then serve it at scale using the CDN from these companies. So it's a crazy world we live in, Yaniv. It really is.
Definitely.
This is an example of what's happening in NPM. This is a actual user in NPM. This Brennan Lupke's whatever. This user in NPM has published now almost 1,200 crypto mining packages. I reached out to GitHub 2 months ago about this user, made a ticket, went through the process, took my time out of my day to make a ticket about this. This user back then, this user had only uploaded 600 malicious files. Now they've almost doubled that. They're at over 1,100, and the user's still in NPM. So people are still downloading these crypto miners to this day. The scale of this problem, it's gotten to the point now, unfortunately, where many of the SCM providers, specifically NPM and GitHub, the scale of it is so large that they just can't. So they're not really even addressing crypto miners anymore. There's millions of crypto miners in GitHub and NPM right now. They're just trying to tackle CSAM and porn and things that things that are more accessible for their teams. And I don't think they even have the capability anymore to address these things, because I know when I put tickets in for the last 2 or 3 months, it never gets taken down. So that says to me that they're just not addressing this anymore. Now, 5 months ago they were, but now they're not, because of the number of them has gone up.
Interesting. So GitHub, if you see this, Paul already opened the ticket. So search it backwards, and let's remove these guys. Although very easily you can come back in a different username and do the same.
Yeah, and that, exactly the point. Like this actual user right here was using another user in npm, and that user has been taken down, but this particular one hasn't. So these 1,200
Yeah.
files here, are still there, but it's a scale problem, Yaniv, and bad guys have realized to leverage what used to be a good thing for bad purposes.
Right.
So yeah, this gets us to our code puppets. I love this. This is goofy, but I teach this in my training class. Building a good-looking code puppet is very powerful from an offensive red teaming perspective. It's a trusting ecosystem. People look at your GitHub activity graph to identify whether or not you're legit or not. And guess what? It's super easy to fake that. I teach it in my training. There's open source tools out there that do that. But this core thing that we use to kind of figure out, is this GitHub user, you can totally fake it. It's super easy. I've written a tool to do it myself, but it's important for people to understand bad guys are creating these, and you have to be really discerning about who you give access to your projects, especially if you're building open source, in GitHub or wherever.
Right.
Docker Hub, like I said earlier, huge focus for bad guys. One container, it's source code, it's an operating system, it's package, it's DNS, overwrites, it's Etsy host, it's just everything in one. So it's just such a powerful place for bad guys to put malicious content.
And as you move to a cloud native framework, you mentioned it at the beginning, everything is container based, software based,
Yep.
very hard in many locations, many instances. So how do you protect east, west, north, south? It's becoming very
crazy.
challenging. Yeah.
It's also a great, in my visualizing software supply chain, and when I teach this, or if you just go to the project, you'll see how I visualize it out. But the reality is one container actually can attack. Bad guys can use that in multiple places. Developers are building these containers, are using them on their laptops. I do it. That same container then is running in your CI as part of your tests and all that. That same container is running in deployment when you build an artifact and get it ready to push out to the registry. And finally, it's of course being run in runtime. And I guess you can make the argument that it's also running in your cloud because of ECS and Kubernetes and whatnot. So that one attack vector can be run multiple places. So what I see now, Yaniv, is I see crafty bad guys, crafting an attack so that part of it runs on the developer's laptop, and then it's also can run part of the attack from the same container later on when it's run separately from a different place, right? They share a commonality, that attack commonality, which is really, it's creative. When I'm doing red teaming, what is the one thing that all software supply chains have in common? Software engineers, right?
Right.
So I spent a lot of time in my red team engagements really focusing on the developers. We know what the access to the source code provider is. It's going to be the work email. It's really easy for me to use LinkedIn to do OSINT on those engineers. I can find out what their tech stack is, whether they're a senior or a team lead, what have you. Most of them don't use SSH keys. They rarely use MFA. Some of the platforms are pushing them to do that, but it's really easy to phish software engineers because they're so used to seeing so many emails coming from GitHub and GitLab saying, hey, this person has changed this code. You need to look at this PR, doing some code review. They're used to seeing a lot of this. And if you slide a phishing email in that's targeted, they can be over 50% success rate in some cases.
Wow,
Crazy
amazing. I now that you say it makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it, but yeah, true.
Unfortunately, my job is to think like a bad guy. And if I was a bad guy, especially from a red team, obviously from a red team or an offensive perspective, 100%, I'm going to go after your engineers. And I'm going to target the seniors and the team leads. Why? Because they have increased privileges. They're allowed to do hot fixes, right? They're allowed to do all these things that the standard engineers are not allowed to. They can go around the security processes. So that's who I target. And, I'm sure the bad guys are doing that too as well. SSO abuse, just because, you can use GitHub or GitLab now to authenticate into all kinds of stuff. That's a problem because once you authenticate, when does it expire? Package maintainers for these open source projects are absolutely prized targets. ATO in particular, if you've ever used an old email for a project, what happens is the bad guys go out there and look at your old emails to see if the domain's expired. Then they quickly register that domain for that old thing, and suddenly, boom, they take over your project that way.
Right.
It's brutal.
Listen, I'm working with a lot of financial institutions, and ATO, account takeover, is their number one concern.
It is so successful that some red team customers, when we explain how successful it is, they just decide to take it off the scope, and what we concentrate on other things, just because they don't want that, because they know, because it's going to be successful, and they don't want that. They don't want that complexity of of explaining that kind of attack vector, so they just take it out of scope, which makes a lot of sense sometimes. But and social engineering is very powerful in this space.
And it's enough you stole the credentials and you log in, it looks legitimate, no one knows you have a malicious intent. That's where maybe machine learning is coming, and AI, and there is technology to handle that. But once you log in, that's it. You can do many things with the permission, as you said. And that's why it's important, especially for developers and DevSecOps, you know that better than me, to control the attack surface, to minimize that, and learn the behaviors of the users, maybe to build a fingerprint on the way they operate and what they do.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's been a complex 25 years where we have not a great relationship between security and software engineering teams, and that's part of the problem, right? They're not. That's what DevSecOps was supposed to fix, mate. But hasn't really happened for a lot of people yet. But I think one of the things that I spend a lot of time with my customers, and when I'm helping organizations out, is to help them understand what is a software supply chain, and that's why I've created those open source projects that I told you about. But I think like a standard software supply chain, the point of it is to deliver something that actually works for customers, right? But the difference is, a supply chain for a car, once you put the car together, it drives off the lot and it's done, right? Whereas with software, you drive it off the lot and you're immediately iterating on it more. So just that, like, the amount of change that goes into our software supply chains is so high. And that's something I'm really trying to help people understand, is that looking at these other kind of third-party APIs and other components is part of that software supply chain that they also need to be concerned about. And that is a great segue into the training that I'm doing in your neck of the woods, my friend, in Singapore. Well, I'm looking forward to coming to the OWASP Global AppSec Day in Singapore, which is the 1st and 2nd of October. Training's on the 1st and the conference is on the 2nd. I did this last year as a virtual event, and I'm really excited to come back to your neck of the woods. It's an all-day training. It is a paid training, but we will be going into, and our target for these trainings are typically offensive security people, red teamers. However, I always get about 40% of the audience that is software engineers, and occasionally, blue teamers too as well. But I love it when there's software engineers in the audience, because that gives it like a really kind of diverse, and you're taking different observations. So I really highly recommend, even if you're not in offensive security, if you're interested in, the security of software supply chain, and you are a software engineer or a blue teamer, please come as well. I've got content for you, and you'll learn a lot as well. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. There's going to be 3 training sessions. Mine, which is the first one there, the red teaming the software supply chain. A friend of mine, Abraham, will be doing his, I think this is a web hacking, and there's another one too as well I'm not familiar with. But yeah, it's a one-day training. So the training is on the 1st, all-day training for 650 Singapore, and then the next day, the ticket price is, I don't want to say $100 or something like that.
Oh, nice.
It's going to be well attended. I'm looking forward to it. I've got some new content for it too as well. My code puppets, I've added that. Dependency confusion around the NPM stuff that I'm doing, I've added some new content around that, and a couple other places too as well. So it's got some new stuff that I've never taught before. I'm really excited to deliver that as part of the Singapore event.
Great. So it's actually a great opportunity. So everyone that sees that, grab the opportunity. October 1st to October 2nd, one day, full training with Paul.
At the end of November, I'm also doing one at B-Sides, Melbourne. Melbourne B-Sides is my favorite B-Side. I mean, I'm running the Gold Coast B-Sides, so that has to be my favorite. But Melbourne is my second favorite. I've been going to it now 4 or 5 years. I love it. It's a great crew. Very diverse audience. I had like 50% software engineers in it last year when I did a similar event. Yeah, similar training. Again, 1 day training, and then the conference is 2 additional days too as well. So a total of 3 days there.
So for this training and Singapore training, any prerequisite for anyone that is joining?
I suggest that people have some experience with Git and with software development as a whole, and understanding, how the sausage is made, CI/CD pipelines. They don't need to be an expert. They just have to work with it and understand the basics, and then I'll help build out the skill set from there. So we typically get some people that are very, very new, as well as some people that are, in offensive application security roles, and I typically can cater to both of them at the same time. I've gotten pretty good at doing this stuff for a few years, so I typically can cater to both of them. Yeah, just I'm working on, this is my stealth project, Git Hacks. It's not actually a product yet, but it works. We found some serious issues for a large insurance company in a large bank here, one of the big four banks here. It's not a product yet. I don't know if this is going to be threat intel you need. I don't know if this is going to be vulnerability research or what it is going to be, some combination thereof, but it works. It finds things, that identifies things like that early tsunami warning system. One other thing I want to mention too, at Melbourne B-Sides, I am dropping a new attack that works on GitHub, GitLab, and Gitia.
Oh, wow.
I've never, it's brand new. So if you and I want to do another separate, like short little one close to Melbourne B-Sides or something like that. I mean, this would be a short, to demo it only takes 5 minutes. It's a pretty simple attack, but man, it's effective.
Wow. So that's cool. Definitely. I want to do it. Thank you so much. It's very insightful session. I'm sure that many would love it. And if you are interested, guys, in red teaming, in supply chain attack, if you are a developer that are interested to secure or harden your code, or you like cybersecurity, you want to learn more, if you are a blue teamer that want to know how the red team guys are thinking, this is the session for you. Again, I want to remind everyone, Paul will be visiting in Singapore for a session on application security, vulnerabilities, risk assessments, October 1st, October 2nd. This is a paid training, but definitely worth it, full day. We have all of the information in the description. And the second training is in Australia, in Melbourne, Paul?
Yes, sir. Yep.
November
November 15th.
November 15 again. And before that, we'll show even a short video on the new attack that Paul was speaking about. So if you survived until now, thank you very much. If you like such content, let us know. Leave your comment, please like. And if you are still not a subscriber, please do it. It will only take you a second. And until the next time, see you.